I have no right to tell you what to do. You know, if you want to live a certain way, and I disagree, that's tough. You know, that's your choosing. That's the individual's choice, as long as you don't hurt somebody else. So the person has the right to his own life and his liberty, his own lifestyle, as with one special rule, that your lifestyle, the individual's lifestyle, can't hurt somebody else. So if you do things that I disapprove of, I, as a libertarian, am tolerant and I accept that up until the point of no injury to anybody else.
Now, I talk to libertarians or listen to them or view them on TV, and they're talking about government power all the time and abuse of governmental power. But I also see some libertarians, not a whole lot of them, but a lot of them also talk about corporate power as well. In other words, they're talking about power in general. There seem to be two types of libertarians.
Well, I think we have one type of libertarian because we all accept the same principle. I think it's more easily found that you have several types of Republicans and several types of Democrats because they're interventionists and they can intervene any way they want. But I think libertarians are pretty consistent in certainly condemning the power of government. I haven't heard a libertarian saying that we need more government or they're not a libertarian. But on the corporate power, I think where the confusion might come is corporate size, if it's gained by serving the consumer, is not necessarily evil. So if you have 90% of the car industry, for some miraculous reason or for some unknown reason, there's no imports. If you have 90% of it, that doesn't bother me as a libertarian if you have the best car at the best price and the consumers are very happy. Now, if you have 90% or 100% of a utility company and you're gouging the customers and the customers have no place else to go, we detest the corporate size. We detest corporate power when it's gained through government power, you know, government coercion. If it's a contract, the military-industrial complex is a pretty good example of how large industries benefit by big government. Of course, in banking, big banks benefit by this monetary system because they're sort of in collusion with the Federal Reserve System, so we detest that. We detest bigness and we detest corporate power when it's gained through privilege from government. If corporations are large, and there's always free entry in a free market, if they're large because they serve the consumer, we don't worry too much about that because we know the consumer is benefiting. If they get to the point, if they had 100% of an industry, which is not possible in a free market, but let's say, just for instance, if they had 100%, and then they started to gouge the people, there would immediately be competition. You know, there always has to be free entry and free competition. But nobody's ever figured out where there's ever been a true monopoly in a free market system. All monopolies can be traced to some form of government protectionism.
Some libertarians are against the public school system. They would close down the public school system. Do you think this is a good thing, or do you believe in that?
Well, I don't think the public school system has a real good record. I think the educational quality is very, very low and getting lower all the time. I think that you can go to some of the big cities and you find out that the schools are drug infested and crime infested, and there's violence and very little education. More than 1 million kids drop out a year before they get their high school diploma. It's an armed fortress, and so we think the record is very poor. So we have concern about good education, and of course we want to go in the direction of privatizing all schools. But in the very practical world of politics, I don't think it's wise for me to say that tomorrow we could have private schools. I don't think it's likely to happen. So we can do a whole lot, set our ideals, work toward it, and we could change a whole lot. I think where we really have gone astray has been in this century, where we have gotten, in probably the last 30 or 40 years, when we got the federal government involved. And the local governments have been involved in schools most of our history. And I think if we had the federal government out of it and the state governments and schools were controlled locally, although that wouldn't be perfect libertarianism, it would be a far cry better than what we have. But even short of doing all that, we as libertarians would really promote a little competition. We don't like monopolies when they're government monopolies, because that's really the only monopoly you get. But a monopoly of our school system is a great danger. So we would immediately introduce the idea, and we think it would help the schools right off. And that is, allow tax credits or vouchers for people who want prayer in the schools, How can we force people to have prayer in school? You know, that's a violation of civil liberties. But what we could do is say, if you don't like the way your kids are being taught, let's allow you to have competition. Let's give you a tax credit or a voucher and go down the street and have the kind of school you want. So we would want competition. That, to me, would be a practical alternative and moving in the right direction.
I want to focus on the Federal Reserve itself for a moment, in that I wonder, you know, what percentage of the people know that the Federal Reserve is not really a part of the government, a privately owned corporation, and who owns that, you know, the Federal Reserve? Well, do you have a comment on that?
Well, I think very few people understand how it works because the members of Congress weren't really very much aware of it. But I think it's a little bit worse than just saying it's private. You know, if it were just private, they'd have to live within the laws of the land of fraud, and they would have to be a public corporation. And, you know, if there's a public corporation, you have a right to know what your corporation is doing if you own stock.
And be audited.
Here it's secret, but where do they get their power? Is it the power of the marketplace that creates this corporation? No, they, in addition to being very secretive, have their authorization, their creation from government. So the government creates them, and they create a special thing. So it's much worse than just being a private corporation. It is a very secretive, private, government-ordained corporation that has the power to counterfeit money. So it's very, very unique and much worse than just being private. It's the secrecy of it and the power that it gets through government legislation that makes it so evil.
Now, you were the ranking Republican on the House Banking Committee for a while.
On one of the subcommittees, but not on the entire committee.
And do I understand correctly that members of Congress can't even go to the Fed meetings?
That's right. I was very interested in the issue, and I was on 3 subcommittees, 2 being on coinage and domestic monetary policy subcommittee. But I could not go to a meeting. I couldn't get an audit. I couldn't even check the books. And they're the ones who create the money. Yet I felt like I was elected to be responsible to the people, and I would be inquisitive and looking into these things. Their attitude is, when you need to know, or when the people need to know, we'll tell you. They're in charge, and we're just on the outside looking in, rather than the people being in charge of the government, sending me or somebody else as their congressman to control the bureaucrats. But it's turned upside down. They have control, and they allow us to know what we want and what they think we should know.
Now, what does the Federal Reserve System actually do? So many people say, you know, I see this and the Federal Reserve, I don't know what the Federal Reserve Bank does, and why is it so significant?
Well, it does several things. One of the benign things it does, and in some ways efficiently, and that is they exchange checks. You know, they're an exchange bureau, but that could be done very easily privately. The real evil that they do is they create money and credit. If the federal government runs up a debt, and they tend to have a habit of doing this, you know, and Congress is, you know, run by Republicans and Democrats, so they all spend money, they run up the debt. Of course, when they spend, they have to tax us. If they can't tax enough, then they have to borrow. And if they can't borrow enough, then they have one other option. They can tax and borrow, inflate. Inflate. The most important thing to remember is inflating is not the prices. The prices go up after the money is inflated, and the money loses its value. So the Fed is designed to accommodate the politician in a very secretive manner. The politicians spend the money because the special interest is going to say, we want this, we want this. The politician gets reelected, so he's rewarded, and the tax becomes an indirect tax. Instead of going directly to the people, what the Federal Reserve does is they can take a treasury bill, accept the treasury bill, which now is just a mere computer entry. They accept the treasury bill of $10 billion. And they give Treasury $10 billion in their checking accounts. Where did the Federal Reserve get the money? Right out of thin air, right from heaven. They create the money, they put it in a checking account, and the Treasury spends it. And then that means that the people who got that money immediately get to spend it, and it has value. But as it circulates in the economy, the value of the purchasing power of the money goes down, and you have prices going up. The bad part about this is not everybody suffers equally. If the money supply went up 10% and every one of us had the cost of living go up identically 10%, there wouldn't be nearly the great harm. But because of the system, it's designed literally to benefit the politicians and the bankers and big corporations, those who get the money. They get the money, they get the benefit, and then somebody else in a year or 2 or 3 suffers the consequences.
We read about the Federal Reserve as a banker's bank And we see them that they raise the discount rate or they increase the money supply. What do all these things mean?
Well, the banker's bank means literally that the bankers are required to put their deposits in the Federal Reserve System, and they're accountable to the Federal Reserve System. They have to send in the reports to the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve has all these regulations and rules, so they control the whole entire banking system. If in their efforts to fine-tune, although they literally destroy the money, they don't want to destroy the money. They want to control things so when inflation gets perking along, they're aware of the same economic thoughts that I'm aware of, and they know that if they're not a little bit cautious about this, they could have, runaway inflation, so they tend to back off. But they benefit from the backing off. That means they tighten the credit, raise the interest rates, and cause a recession. And they do it in the name of saving the economy, which they have to, or the currency gets out of control. But if they know it's coming, then they benefit on it too. Then they benefit. They know then to be in cash and earn high interest rates, and the banks benefit by it. So they, whether the economy is going up or down, if they're designing the policy, they can catch the swing. So it's the inside information that they have. But if they didn't give the recessions, which are literally the results of the inflation, the system would crumble much faster. But our argument as hard money people is that in spite of their arrogance to think that they can keep this going forever, and as powerful as they are, the market is more powerful. See, for decades they kept the gold price at $35 an ounce. They said, we will regulate the price of gold. But they kept printing the money. The market finally broke down the price of gold. Well, the marketplace will finally win out, and the people will wake up and say, it's all a paper, it's all a scam. And that's when there's chaos, and that's when the bankers realize they're getting out of control, and that's when the connection of the bankers to the politicians is critical, because then power is threatened. So that's when they come down with political controls of our lives. That's why the emergency powers are already written. The president can declare an emergency and take over the industries and take over our lives and confiscate the gold. And that's why we should be concerned. We should be concerned for, our prosperity, our standard of living and all. But our greatest concern ought to be that when these crises come in, the market disrupts this political system and this monetary system, then we're threatened by political power taking away more of our personal liberties.
Are this the FEMA regulations that you're talking about, the program?
Yes, it's done under the FEMA, the emergency powers, and it came up even in the Contra hearings that there were emergency powers written. As a matter of fact, that great hero Oliver North was participating in deciding some of these to literally, if necessary, suspend the Constitution. These are the kind of things they're talking about. I don't know if you recall.
Set up concentration camps.
When this was brought up in the FEMA, in the Iran-Contra hearings, remember? They immediately suppressed it, and they say, this is something we can't discuss in the